Right, picture this. You've got the fastest bike on the grid. Two of your riders are sitting pretty in second and third. All they need to do is hold position, the points keep rolling in, and the world championship is basically yours for the taking. And then suddenly, your own two riders take each other out on lap 1. That's exactly what happened to Aprilia at Catalunya last weekend. In this video, we're going to break down the full story of the Martin versus Fernandez clash, work out who was actually at fault, and most importantly, ask the big question, does Aprilia now need to issue factory orders to keep their own riders in check? Because if they don't sort this out sharpish, it could become a ticking time bomb for their entire season. Let's get into it. Here's how it all unfolded. At the 2026 Catalan Grand Prix last weekend, the race had to be restarted. On the very first lap of that restart, Jorge Martin and Raul Fernandez were having a right old ding-dong battle for second and third place. The two were scrapping over second position on the opening lap of the restarted Barcelona race when they made contact at turn 5. Fernandez from Trackhouse dived up the inside but collected Martin, the reigning 2024 world champion, and sent him tumbling to the ground, while Fernandez himself ran wide off the circuit. The result? Martin out on the spot. Points gone. And to make matters worse, Martin shoved team manager Paulo Bonora in the pit lane in the heat of the moment. Though he did apologize afterwards, the FIM stewards called it a racing incident, so nobody picked up a penalty. But here's the thing, the penalty isn't really the point. The bigger issue runs a lot deeper than that. After the incident, both camps came out swinging, and as you'd fully expect, each side was absolutely convinced the other was at fault. Fernandez pointed the finger squarely at Martin, while Martin felt the opposite was true. Classic, isn't it? Now, what's particularly interesting is what the people above them had to say. Aprilia CEO Massimo Rivola was pretty straight-talking about the whole affair. Rivola said that both riders could have done more to avoid the clash, though in his view, Fernandez carried slightly more responsibility. He made the point that between Aprilia riders, they need to show a bit more consideration for one another, especially on the opening lap, especially on different tire compounds, and especially when you're already sitting in second and third. In other words, why on earth are you taking unnecessary risks when you're already in a brilliant position? Over at Trackhouse, team boss Davide Brivio had a slightly different take. Brivio argued that Fernandez had a legitimate gap to go for and was perfectly within his rights to attempt the move. That said, he acknowledged that perhaps Aprilia's riders need to be more mindful of one another going forward. His reading of the footage was that there was a space available. Fernandez went for it, but then Martin closed the door. So in Brivio's eyes, both riders were simply fighting to hold or gain a position. So Brivio's version, Fernandez wasn't entirely in the wrong, but the incident is still a lesson worth learning from. Right, let's look at the damage this has done to the championship standings. The incident proved enormously costly for Martin, who failed to score a single point across both the sprint and the main race at the weekend. Meanwhile, his factory teammate Marco Bezzecchi was able to extend his championship lead to 15 points at the end of what was already a difficult weekend for Aprilia as a whole. 15 points, that's a proper chunk. And it's not just about the numbers either, it's about momentum. Martin now looks like the biggest loser from this whole drama, and yet he's arguably the most dangerous rider on the grid when everything's going his way. And the context makes it all feel even more significant when you zoom out a bit. With Aprilia clearly fielding the strongest package on the grid at the moment, the team looks increasingly likely to find itself in an intra-team title battle between Bezzecchi and Martin. So the big question becomes, how exactly does Aprilia manage all of this? Now, if you think the problem is simply two riders having a coming together, hold on, because there are several more layers to this that make things considerably more awkward. Aprilia also faces the situation where two of its riders, Martin and Io Gura, are leaving at the end of the season, while Fernandez is fighting for his own future at the team. Things are further complicated by Brivio's announcement that he himself will be departing Trackhouse at the end of 2026. So think about what that picture actually looks like. The lead rider is on his way out. The team boss is on his way out, and right in the middle of all that uncertainty, they're supposed to be mounting a credible world championship challenge. One gust of wind in the wrong direction and the whole thing could unravel very quickly. This is the crux of it all. Factory orders, team orders, is when the manufacturer or management formally tells a rider, you don't overtake that bloke, or you give way to this one. We've seen it before. Rossi and Stoner at Ducati, Hamilton and Rosberg at Mercedes, and none of those stories ended particularly tidily. For now, there's been no public mention of any formal factory orders from Aprilia. Rivola himself seems to be banking on the rider's own common sense. He said that as long as the rules are clear, the riders know full well when they can take a risk and when they simply cannot. In his view, an unnecessary risk was taken here. Points were dropped across the board. Trackhouse lost out too. And the lesson ought to be a fairly straightforward one to absorb. But honestly, are those wise words enough when two competitive riders are both absolutely desperate to win? Rivola did hint at the possibility of a meeting involving all four Aprilia riders to remind everyone that they're all working towards the same goal. Brivio agreed that the incident happened in the heat of the moment, when adrenaline was running high, but insisted there's no bad blood between himself and Rivola. They watched the footage together, and everything, he said, is absolutely fine. A four-rider summit, footage reviewed together, everything apparently fine. Sounds a lot like very carefully managed crisis control, doesn't it? When you step back and look at the whole thing, this isn't simply a case of two riders miscommunicating through a corner. It's a reflection of just how complicated Aprilia's situation is this season. They have the best motorcycle. They have four competitive riders, but precisely because of that, the potential for internal conflict is enormous. Bezzecchi is on a real charge. Martin is a world champion who absolutely refuses to settle for second best. Fernandez is fighting for his career, and Ogura wants to prove himself before he moves on. Every single one of them has something to fight for. Every one of them wants to win, and they're all riding the same machine. Without clear guidelines, whether that's formal factory orders or at least some kind of informal agreement that everyone genuinely respects, incidents like this will happen again. Not if, when. Mercedes learnt that lesson the hard way with Hamilton and Rosberg. The question now is whether Aprilia are willing to wait until things properly boil over before they step in and do something about it. Right then, I want to know what you lot think. Who do you reckon was more at fault here, Martin, who allegedly closed the door, or Fernandez, who went for a bold move on the inside on lap 1? Drop it in the comments. Type Martin if you think he carries more blame. Type Fernandez if you think he was the one who overstepped the mark. Or type racing incident if you reckon it was just one of those things and nobody's particularly at fault. Let's see where the votes land. And here's the bonus question, which I think is the really juicy one. Should Aprilia actually bring in factory orders? Or should they let the riders race freely and just accept that moments like this come with the territory? My honest view, Aprilia need a proper serious conversation before the next round, not just a polite sit-down that gets forgotten about by Monday morning. Because dropping 15 points in an internal clash is painful enough. Losing the world championship because of it. That would be an absolute disaster. If you enjoyed this one, do hit subscribe and turn on the notifications so you never miss our MotoGP breakdowns every single week. And if you've got mates who are into MotoGP, share this with them. The more voices in the comments, the better the debate. See you in the next one.